Matt Taylor is a freelance designer, illustrator, and artist who works with ink, paint, and computers to create logos, websites, t-shirts, and arguably some of the best-known murals in Northwest Ohio. Branding himself as Mr. Taylor, he has a bold, innovative style that relies on heavy lines and sometimes minimal color. He's a member of the Madav Collective and the co-founder of Divicious.com. Would you please welcome to Shop Talk, Matt Taylor.
I will just say that drawing is such a huge part of everyday life for me. Drawing is very much tied into any sort of video editing, any sort of website design, any sort of, photography concepts I want to try to get. I'm always drawing it on paper first. Everything starts off as a thumbnail, a little 3-inch sketch of what my intention is. And then from there, whether that turns into a sculpture, whether that turns into a mural, I never, whether or not I have that ahead of time, it's not always clear, but it always starts off here. I'm always starting off really light, building things up progressively in terms of just real loose sketches, real big. It's all about that user experience, that end game. What do you want to get most out of this project? So you have to think about that in the small terms first, and think about that, how that works. So that's just something I really try to focus on. Web development is a whole different mentality, I think, than what I've done with ink and what I've done in the past. And to me, it's a very therapeutic thing to go back and forth. Web development is very technical and very heavy for my head. Like, it's that left brain, right brain argument, but it's very much something I can dive into and get lost in sometimes, and just very rewarding when you work through those web problems that you have to get this to size just right. And you could spend 3 hours on just coding like one little section, but when you do finally get that website to look the way you wanted it to, there's a little bit of like a cheer in my head. It's a little bit of a reward when went through all that work and all that struggle to try to get the code right, and eventually you come to that solution. And that's that whole process of just getting there, which it's supremely rewarding. And then that is completely different from when I'm building a drawing or I'm building an illustration. That's all let go. As soon as I start putting pen on the paper, I'm trying to separate myself from any of that technical mentality, any of that strict planning. I have some loose plans, but I like to just vibe with whatever's coming out at the moment. And so that's just some fun thing I've been realizing lately with myself is switching that back and forth between those two ways of thinking. It's I don't know. It keeps me very excited about what I do every day. It's a chance to really dive in hard and use your brain, but then also just escape. So in terms of that as well, digital. A lot of people kind of say that could be, people use digital in terms of art as a crutch. I think in some ways it can be used as a crutch, but because it's so forgiving, I think the great benefit of working digitally, I don't do a lot of, that's actually one I digitally colored right there, but I don't do a lot of work where I start digitally. Like I said, I do a lot of work where I start on the sketchbook, but when I'm putting pen on paper, there's no Control-Z, there's no undo for me to step back. So I'm forced to deal with those problems a little differently. And if I just tweak my arm a little bit and it bumps a line that I didn't really plan on, then that becomes something I have to deal with and something I have to build upon and show. Like, that was some sort of step along the way in the process that I had to deal with and include into this composition, but with the computer, it's just nope. That didn't want to be there. So that's one thing that I've tried to keep in mind. So I'm not just using that as a crutch, but it's something it's much more forgiving to work digitally, and in doing that, I've also developed this whole different language it's like when you're working in Illustrator or you're working in Photoshop, I feel like my keyboard shortcuts that I've learned over the years have just turned me into like, I'm not even doing things with my mouse as much. I'm just like in the zone. I'm not even thinking actively about it. Like it's not like I can't speak Spanish. I can't talk another language. But when I'm trying to relay like some of these keyboard shortcuts to someone that doesn't know them, it's like its own separate language, and that's fun. Like I think I love watching other people use Photoshop and Illustrator. Like that's one thing I try to do if I can find a designer to just sit back and watch them build something. I think there's huge benefits to that because they're going to do shortcuts that you would have never thought. They're going to come up with ways to do, add that layer to the last layer, and like, what did you do there? Like explain to me how you did that or how you came to that, because those programs, all these programs we're using, I feel like there's 6 different ways to do one process. So everybody's got their own little spin on that. So it's really fun to watch other people work. And at Thrive, the 2 other designer developers that are there, they work completely different. The one guy, Andy, is completely organized with his Photoshop layers, and they're all color coded and labeled and nested nicely. And when I'm working in Photoshop, he probably hates to open my Photoshop documents because I'm very much like, it's like my car right now. There's just art supplies strewn everywhere, and my layers are very much like my car. It's Photoshop layers are just everywhere. There's stuff that shouldn't be up here and not labeled, and it's all Untitled 1, Untitled 2. But working there for 6 months, it's forced me to think about that, and now it's like future-proofing yourself to be very consistent with labeling and getting that kind of cleanliness to your files is really important. It's something like that I wouldn't have come across on my own, because if left to my own devices, I would just be loose and messy, and no one needs to look at these files but me, so I'll struggle through it. But knowing that other people have to access these files at some point, it's important to kind of do that. So in all of those terms, this is all of my second language, I feel like, for this digital speak of all of the keyboard shortcuts, all of the layering and all of that stuff. It's funny the way that you have to deal with that and kind of learn as you go. And they're always adding new features, adding new things that you can do in Photoshop and Illustrator. And then I guess I'll talk about wireframing. That kind of leads me into wireframing a little bit. The way that I like to work. Let me pull up something here on the screen, because wireframing to me doesn't have to necessarily be just a web term. Wireframing is a way of let me open this. Starting very loose, starting very rough, overall overview picture style. So this is the Black Kite mural, which is on Collingwood, and this is just a better way than me just rambling on about my process. I'll show you kind of where this started, and this works in terms of websites. This works in terms of sketches that I know I want to complete, and branding and logos, all of that stuff. That I like to work this way, where I'm starting really small. Like I said, this drawing is probably only 3 inches. But it was just like, I want to do this mosaic. I want to get something that I know is compartmentalized so I can eventually expand on each one of those parts. So the Black Kite mural started with the theme of the trees on Collingwood, but that was about the extent of what I was given. I knew it was, let's base it on some history of the area. Let's base it on the awesome nature that we have around and that kind of thing. So it was very loose, but I knew I wanted to compartmentalize it so that way I could have potential to whatever I wanted to put in this box later. I knew that was something that was in place that I could do something, and same with all of these. So I'm just going to kind of move on. And then my drawing started getting a little more in depth. Started throwing out. I just take notes all the time. I'm always talking things out with who's involved, and so I have. This is probably reminiscent of my Photoshop layers. I have like just little notes kind of sticking out, and only I really know what I'm talking about, I feel like sometimes, but it's there for me to go back and look at. And it's just all about building that little bit, tightening it up every time, every little step. So I was just looking through these the other day because I was kind of trying to come up with slides for this, and it was like, it's cool to go back and look at these processes. I get lost and I forget about all of these nights that I spent just kind of planning this. Now that it's been in front of my face for so long, that mural's been up and it was finished, and I see it all the time now. It's like hard to remember that it was at one point partially finished and, you know, just a sketch on a piece of paper. So this was kind of like my very first real illustration for the project. I knew I wanted to do, these are honey locust leaves, and the trees that were cut down on Collingwood were all honey locusts. So the mural was in call to like, let's honor the trees that used to be lining our road, and, you know, just call that out a little bit. So that was the very first one. I knew that this texture was something that will be introduced into the mural itself. Then I switched to digital. So now I'm worried about measurements. I took real strict measurements of the building itself, and kind of knew that if I got this going in Illustrator, I would have my exact measurements for each section that I wanted to balance. And so this is my wireframe in terms of a mural wireframe, but would be very similar. Like if this was the like a website layout, you know, I just know that I want this there. You know, what it's going to be and what it's going to be developing into is a different story, but bare bones. Then I started to work with color schemes and figure that out, and what visually, from when you just glance at this, what is this going to look like? Because you don't want something that someone's driving by. It's great to have detail, but when someone's driving by, it has to just be a brief overview, and that's why I like to work so small. We were talking about Aaron Draplin earlier and doing logos that are tiny and based on looking at it as if it was going to be a small emblem on your T-shirt or something. When you start that way, you're forced to make it the most concise, most minimal vision that you want to get across. So that, you know, that's again transcends into this. Then we adjusted the colors a little bit, so this was pretty neon-y, and those lime greens kind of popped out too much, I think. So we toned that back. I threw on the idea of having this bright red cardinal, but I didn't want it to be kind of like, that's like every Ohio thing that's done is like a big red cardinal. So I kind of stepped back away from that and ended up with a sparrow. But these were just all steps along the way. They helped me communicate with the end client, which was Rachel Richardson with Art Corner Toledo, which was just awesome to work with, and the Black Kite. But just in terms of getting my vision across to her without me having to have a 2-hour meeting and talk about all this, I like to do these little visual things where, you know, this is what the honey locust is going to be here, and here's old dictionary-like thumbnail engraving. You know, it's just a little quick note of what that's going to be. And then, let's see, I think I have a couple more pictures in this folder. Like here is a mock-up I did. So I took a photo and then brought that photo into Illustrator. And then in the very same way that I was doing those color mock-ups, I was just like, all right, that's where I know that line needs to go. And all my measurements were kind of done for me ahead of time. And then I could go freehand, and I could go, once I had the skeleton in there, I could just do whatever I felt like, you know, getting into for each of those sections. There's got to be a closer to finished one. Yeah. So it's just slowly chipping away. I think my turning point as far as how I thought about the world and how I thought about my art and design in general was when I started my figure drawing class at Bowling Green. I took figure drawing in, I think, like 2005 when I very first got to BG. I was able to take some art classes along with my visual communications courses, and I was completely like just overwhelmed and didn't know what to draw on the paper when I got into that class. And by the end, I completely saw things differently. I was looking at light and values and shapes and breaking every single thing that you look at down into its multiple facets and its overall structure. And it really was like a mind-blowing thing. And I can really see a difference from anything pre-figure drawing. I had a style and I had a way of doing things. And then from that point forward, I felt like I got stronger as an artist, and I got stronger as conceptually stronger into thinking of like, how does this break down? What's the important weights? Where do I want the eye to flow? It was really all about, first seeing it objectively and breaking any sort of subjectivity to it, no concept, and just drawing. And then at the end of the class, we were like, all right, I really want this knee to be forward in the space and really be what draws your eye into this whole composition. So it just really made me think of that a little differently. And I really recommend, if you've never taken a figure drawing class, or even the Arts by Depot offers those drink and draw nights where there's a live model. It takes a second, and it takes a lot of practice and a lot of sketching and a lot of small works that lead you up into doing something big. But it was really beneficial as an artist and a designer to know value and to know how to show that value just subtly, to kind of control people's eyes without them knowing it, type of thing. And by taking those classes and learning those kind of concepts, now I think about those things when I'm doing a website or when I'm doing a flyer, that I know the most important bit of information is the phone number. That's what we want people to get to, is to call somebody at the end of this. So all of that text has to kind of get you to an anchor point of where that phone number is, so you can pound that home, and that's your message. And that's, to me, that's very similar to a figure drawing, that you want that striking glance of the person, so you really just lead their eye back up to the eyes or the face, or it kind of all relates to me in that way. And that's something I never planned on learning, but I think that's the idea, is being open to learn and being open to take every opportunity to expand what you can do. And I would have never thought that something like figure drawing was something that would really change the way I thought of things, but it was a huge step for sure. So I mean that's a lot of the fine art stuff. I did want to send this around. I know I should have sent it out earlier, but this is a series of. I did these series of letters just as an experiment, just as a little test for myself to see, can I go through the alphabet? Yeah, great, thanks. That way, every page, yeah, and just feel free to flip through it and take your time. Every page, I didn't have to think of what I was going to draw. I was like, this page is A, and then tomorrow I'm going to do B, and whether or not it was every day, but I didn't have to think of it, so it took concept out of it, and it was more just about an expression and a chance to play with colors that I wouldn't normally use. And those are just like kind of little fun tests that you can give yourself to push yourself out of your own realm. And I feel like because of doing things like that, I really just dove hard into typography and script after doing that for myself. And so it was just no rhyme or reason. It was just this. I bought a new sketchbook. What should I do? I did the letter A, and then, okay, I got to finish the alphabet now. So I have a whole series of those that I listed on Instagram, and it was just a cool exposure. I tagged lettering, I tagged hand type and all that stuff. A lot of people found me through that. And Scott was asking earlier about my Mr. Taylor, the use of Mr. Taylor as my name and logo type. I want to touch on that just a bit. I had to find a way to identify myself early on. Matt Taylor isn't really an uncommon name. I think I've met probably 5 or 6 in my lifetime, and the funny thing is there's an amazing illustrator in the UK named Matt Taylor, and his style is what at the time I was like, I want to attain to be a lot. I mean, this guy's style was awesome. I had found out just by doing some searches, and so I was like, well, I don't want to be confused with Matt Taylor, the illustrator, and have it be this guy that's like way better than me on a whole different level. That kind of is where I was like, all right, well, what am I going to go by? What's my thing? So I started using Mr. Taylor, and hellomrtaylor.com is my website. And as soon as I started branding myself, I felt the benefits of that, like to give myself a label, to give myself something to call what I was doing in terms of and it's very much a loose thing. It's not like Mr. Taylor's all illustration. This is just an overall thing for I do web design, photos, all under that label of Mr. Taylor. So it's just kind of a necessity at first, but it was a really great way to brand myself and to make it easily identifiable. I can throw that up there on Instagram and just say Mr. Taylor. There's a lot of teachers and stuff that would probably come up, I guess, but when I can tag it with illustration or with Divicious, and it's just identifiable. So and feel free afterwards. I've got a bunch of stuff kind of just strewn about with some logos. I did this 2013 calendar here is one where completely just a promo for myself. I didn't sell these. I just gave them to everybody I knew, all of my friends and colleagues and people I had worked with. But just a chance to show off my stuff, but then also just to reinforce the logo and the brand and Divicious. It just really helps. I think it's an important thing as a designer, or even in a lot of different fields, is to just in business in general, to have a brand, a strong identity is hugely important. And sometimes we work with people in the web industry and they don't understand that, and you have to guide them through, like, well, just pick a font and make my logo. Well, that's fine, we can do that, but you're gonna have so much value if people can recognize time and time again what your message of your company is. And I think that starts with the logo and the brand. And so in doing that, I had, that was like, when I was developing the Mr. Taylor thing, it was right around the time that I was working with a guy named Micah Lindenberger, and we started a company called Divicious together. Divicious is a t-shirt, apparel, just design collective company between the two of us. And he about 3 years ago moved to Brooklyn, but we still collaborate all the time. We just instantly knew that we worked well together. We were designers, like back-to-back designers in a shop, and I was constantly always turning around saying, hey, take a look at this really quick. What do you think? What should I change? And he was we had a good way of being honest, with each other and not hurting each other's feelings. But it was just like, this sucks. You got to change that color right now, or like, no, that's awesome. And we just had this great give and take. So we decided, like, let's do stuff outside of work. And that turned into creating and starting Divicious, which introduced us to everybody in Toledo. That was our channel to network and our channel to meet people at rock shows. We would go set up at headliners and sell Divicious t-shirts, to people at the Sum 41 concert and that kind of thing. Like, let's just get in front of people and slap our logo out there. And it was just a fun experience, because from there we started doing Artomatic. Artomatic turned into, working a lot with the Arts Commission, and then more and more people knew Matt and Micah of Divicious. So it's just turned into opportunities it's why people knew me enough to ask me to do a mural, and all of those things just have led up to being able to do what I am now and having this job, but also getting constant side work, which is, a blessing and also kind of a downfall sometimes when I'm trying to manage just living life and having time for myself. But I also have this thing where I tend not to say no to people when it comes to like projects that they're creative. I work in a creative industry, and every time someone mentions a project, it gets my mind flowing, and I'm like, yes, I want to do that. I can see that being awesome. So none of that has slowed down. It's just I'm balancing that with a job right now, which is keeps me busy, keeps me active and out of trouble, I guess.